Okay. Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome you in this afternoon session and round table, the ever-expanding domain of patrimonialization, challenges and perspectives. Indeed, we will talk today about the new forms of heritage and new modes of preserving this heritage. And far from being immutable, cultural heritage is a concept that evolves like our societies. And the concept of material heritage as a limited resource that prevailed in the 60s of the 20th century shifted profoundly to the completely different understanding of heritage as an unlimited resource and the infinitive form. However, this did not make the process of patrimonialization any easier. Now we often discuss where are the limits of the heritage. Can anything become heritage? Do we actually need those limits of heritage? Do we know what will be heritage in the future? And to use the very good metaphor by French heritage theoretician François Choy, who talked about the biblical Noah's Ark of heritage, where should we collect anything because it might become heritage in the future. So how to identify and select what is or will be cultural heritage? How can it be protected and how can it feed the process of creation and innovation? Today, Cecilia Bembire, Stefan Schodiron, Emery Gobert, and Marco Romagnoli will present the research, challenges, and innovations of dealing with new fields of heritage. However, today, we also understand as painfully as never before that we can carry our research and conceptualize these new forms of heritage only because we live in a peaceful Europe for decades. And the Putin's war in Ukraine and the Russian military attacks have caused immense suffering and irreparable harm through fundamental human rights and humanitarian law violations, as well as disastrous impacts on millions of women, girls, boys, and men, not to mention heritage, which seems so irrelevant now when we speak about deaths of men and women in Ukraine. The war is not at the doorstep of Europe. The war is in Europe. Now, we often feel it and must understand that, on the other hand, we should not be distracted in our daily life and work, because this is part of the aggressor's warfare, which is clearly directed at Europe and European values. So I continue and invite Cecilia Bembire to present her very interesting research on the heritage of smells or odors. Cecilia is a lecturer in sustainable heritage at the Institute for Sustainable Heritage at the University College of London. She is also a member of the Horizon 2020 Europa project. I invite Cecilia for the presentation, A Nose First Approach to History, Challenges and Opportunities for Heritage Scientists.
Thank you. And thank you very much to the organizers for your interest in the research and to you for coming to listen to it. Okay. How does this work? There we go. So today I will be talking about the nose first approach to history. This is work that I conducted during my PhD research, and I've also worked with Professor Matthias Sterlich, who's here in the audience today, and also during my work at the Horizon 2020 project Out Europa. The premise of my research is that we experience the world with 5 senses. We hear, we see, we touch, we taste, and we smell. However, as soon as we enter a museum, we're asked to observe, to gaze, to look at things, and to keep our distance. So the idea is, how can we talk about a sensory history? Sensory heritage. Where is the role of our other senses in our engagement with the past? And here I would like to introduce the concept of olfactory heritage. This is a working definition, but it's an aspect of cultural heritage that concerns smells that are meaningful to a community because they have ties to connections with places or practices or objects or traditions, and therefore they're worthy of investigation and preservation as part of our cultural heritage. And why we want to preserve these smells? Why are we working on olfactory heritage? I'll give 3 reasons today. First of all, the connection that we establish with our sense of smell, engaging with the past, is more emotional. This is due to the way our sense of smell works. And you might have experienced a whiff taking you back to a memory of a person or a place immediately and immersively. Secondly, olfactory heritage allows us to present heritage more inclusively, because by displacing our attention from our eyes, from vision, we can engage with other narratives, reveal alternative histories, and also involve those communities who are not only visually impaired, for example, but not typical museum goers who are looking for experiences. And thirdly, and perhaps more controversially, smell can be a source of knowledge. This is something that we're not used to thinking about. And I'll give one example here. There is this beautiful painting, and I'm not showing it on purpose, at the Maurits House in The Hague in the Netherlands, depicting a typical cityscape from the 17th century, and we see a beautiful building and lots of trees and a tiny, tiny bit of the canal at the bottom of the picture. So when we look with our eyes, that's what we see. If we enter this image with our nose, we can notice a very small wooden building at the bottom of the image. And this is a privy where people go to the bathroom and the results drop into the canal. And next to that spot, very spot, there's someone washing their laundry. So if you enter this picture with your nose, you can reveal a malodorous smellscape in this very scene that you wouldn't if you just look at it. So at the moment, we don't have an established way of identifying those smells that have cultural value and preserving them, as we do with other expressions of heritage. The smells are mentioned in the Barra Charter as an expression of aesthetic value and therefore cultural significance. Those are the smells that are associated with a place and its use. There are other isolated examples, and here we're looking at a picture of an initiative in 2001 of the Ministry for the Environment in Japan, who invited people to vote for places of good fragrance, understanding that the sensory qualities of a space contribute to a sense of dignity and should be preserved for future generations. They compiled a list of 100 places, and they include natural heritage and also second-hand bookshops and sake distilleries that are for everyone to enjoy. Two other examples. There's the 2018 UNESCO recognition of the knowledge and practices of the perfume-making region of Grasse as intangible heritage of humanity. So we want to protect this know-how for the future. And also in 2021, in January, the French government passed a law protecting the sounds and the smells of the countryside. But as I said, there's no standardized way of protecting this heritage. So we have developed a historic scent preservation framework for that purpose. And this is a 3-step framework with an added 4th step. I'll go quickly on it. So the step 1 involves identifying the value of that olfactory heritage. What makes it worthy of preservation? And we do that with various approaches, but it involves participatory research as intangible cultural heritage. We talk to stakeholders. We also do literature research. And once we know that a smell is worthy of preservation, we characterize them. In step 2, we use analytical techniques to understand the volatile organic compounds, VOCs, responsible for that smell, and then we conduct sensory analysis to understand the human experience of it. And we record that in step 3, in an odor wheel that compiles chemical and sensory data, and also we collect other expressions of significance, because we're interested in archiving the smell for the future, but for that archive to be accessible and to make sense to future generations. So we're interested in knowing what is being left behind this odor wheel. And then step 4 is really bringing those smells back to audiences across the world, across Europe. And I'll mention very quickly 2 projects that are doing so. Od Europa is mining data from digital heritage collections, looking for references to smell, and then finding the stories associated with those references and recreating the smells to present in museums. And this is a Horizon 2020 project, as I mentioned. Odoteca is an international project, a collaboration between Poland and Slovenia, and they're developing methodology for the preservation and archival of smells of cultural significance. And this is essential to prevent the loss of this olfactory heritage once the sources are gone. And now I would like to very quickly give an example. This is work that I've done at St. Paul's Library. This is a library in St. Paul's Cathedral. It's a very small space, which is kept closed and only open to visit. At the moment, it's being refurbished, but it will be reopened after the summer. If you look in the visitors' book for this library, there are many mentions to the significance of the smell. People say, I can inhale wisdom. So we were interested in preserving this smell for future generations, to talk about our value of the practices of reading, our visiting historic libraries. So the smell is a very part of the identity of that building. Here we used analytical techniques, solid phase microextraction, to take a sample of the smell and analyze it in the lab. But we also wanted, in addition to reconstructing the smell from the analytical data, we wanted to compare it with an interpretation created by an artist. So we invited London-based perfumer Sarah McCartney to smell the library and then go back and with that memory create a fragrance. And this is the fragrance that you are smelling today. So I bring you a building on a piece of paper. This is the Library of St. Paul's, created by Sarah McCartney. So please, if you have it, smell it now. And this is her description of the smell. So worn leather, chocolatey vanilla, smooth wood, and tobacco. And this also appeals to a heritage that is very British, of the libraries of manor houses as well. So we asked people, we presented people with this scent and also with the scent that we created following the data obtained in the lab. So you could say a chemically faithful reconstruction of the smell. And we asked them which one evokes historic libraries and old books to you. And half replied that the reconstruction and half replied that the interpretation. So this is a very encouraging sign that interdisciplinary work and collaborative work is needed to understand our olfactory heritage better. And then here, I'm finishing. I just wanted to give a flavor of how diverse working with scent and trying to understand our olfactory heritage is. And this is a result of a series of semi-structured interviews that we conducted with heritage professionals, trying to understand why are not more museums working with smell? Why doesn't the Louvre have a collection of smells of cultural significance? And here I don't expect you to read it, but I'm happy to discuss it later if you like. But we identify barriers and concerns and develop pathways to address them and create best practices regarding the preservation of olfactory heritage and interpretation of it as well. And in addition to this more social sciences work, we also still conduct analytical work. And this is a picture of me working at Tate Modern, where they just closed an olfactory exhibition that they had for 4 months. It was the commission of Annika Yi. And we're trying to measure the impact that diffusing a scent in the museum might have on other pieces of the collection, so we can produce these best practices that I was talking about. And on the right-hand side, you can see the other wheel for the historic book that we developed following the St. Paul's example. And here is thank you to all my colleagues. Thank you very much.
For interesting presentation. I hope you experience Cecilia's research. And now I would like to invite Stefan Schodiron, professor in information and communication sciences at Lille University and member of the Géricault laboratory in France. He will speak about memories, but first I must say the title, The Contribution of Digital Technology for the Preservation, Enhancement and Transmission of the Mining Heritage of Hauts-de-France. Please, Stéphane.
Merci. I apologize because I will speak in French, but it will be more fluent for you. Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, everyone. For more than 250 years, France saw a lot of coal mining from 1720, where we had the first vein of coal discovered, and the 21st of December 1990, that was the day that the last platform came up, the last chunk of coal came up in the Pas-de-Calais area, where the northern coal area was it had seen a lot of coal brought up from underground. So over 250 years that forged not only the natural landscape with slag heaps that you may be familiar with if you've been up in the area. You have pits and mining towns. These have forged the landscape in the north with the industrial installations. So 250 years that marked the cultural landscape as well in the mining area, culturally, linguistically, with vernacular languages, and those like French, Picard, Italian, Polish, Arabic, coming from Belgium, Italy as well, and even Morocco, but also all of the daily activities, cultural, sports leagues. So this illustrates the heritage in the area, how rich it is. That's in industrial and cultural heritage. There's material heritage there as well. So there's, without a doubt, as we see the inscription, the registry of it being in the UNESCO Heritage list in 2012. So results are trifold. First of all, the determination is trifold to express the creativity of people, to maintain the language, and also to hand it down to the future generations. So the project has been financed by ANR through research laboratories, PLIDINA, Jericho, and I'm a member, and the laboratory of Jericho, which is in Lille, and Divisou, which is a science of information and communications in the Valenciennes University. We benefited initially from the presence of the mining area, the bassin minier, which put us on the list for UNESCO and other stakeholders, such as the Ward Historic Center in Lambert, Arenberg, where you know the series Germinal and the film Germinal by Claude Berry. These were all shot in this area. Now, to define our project, I just want to come back to the definition that we've used for heritage, and I said industrial heritage as defined by the TICCIH in 2003. We also have the cultural material definition as UNESCO defined it in 2003, and I just want to insist the fact that we want to give emphasis on the industrial heritage, but the tangible and intangible cultural heritage, living memories of miners, former miners, miners' families, collectors, and all of the associations that are in the mining area to keep that going. So the general issue, though, in maintaining the mines is preserving this cultural heritage that is close to extinction, also with fewer and fewer survivors, and often impacted by respiratory pathway diseases, and then, of course, many passing due to COVID. So we had to change our working methodology with the goal being to safeguard these individual memories, to convert them into memorial traces, and then re-editorialize these, make these available in a form of a corpus digital archive that would be accessible to everyone. So let me give you some examples. So the results could be summed up in three main areas. First of all, creating two organization systems as heritage mediation devices. And then we set up a web platform for annotating and disseminating the memory traces, getting the memories from the former miners and the collectors. And then finally, we have a sort of prototypes of the different mediation devices of these memory traces. Now, regarding the organization systems as heritage mediation devices, we had to formalize the cultural heritage in order so that you had the mine in its operations, but the mine as it is experienced by the workers and the families, and how there's a constant transformation. These slag heaps were turned into ski slopes, or wine. In fact, was grapes were planted in the slag heaps. So it's constantly changing. And so I can give you other examples now. The organizing this knowledge needed to be making available all of the resources. Some are hosted by the Douani and the Nuremberg Association. So a lot of information available there, material, immaterial, digitalized, some not digitalized, all of these resources, and those are spread across the territory. And then we needed to index all of the documentary resources that are not digitalized yet. So we came up with two systems, one which is a thesaurus, trying to make that interoperable from the very beginning with the web semantics and putting it in a SKOS format, SKOS. then a mining heritage ontology. This morning, one of the speakers talked about CDOC, CRM. These are one of the ontological models frequently used in museums. So quickly, because we could spend a lot more time on this, but the first organization system, the thesaurus, was created based on a lot of investigative work that we had collecting and compiling a lexicon from the knowledgeable people, from linguists, professional linguists, and also based on interviews with former miners, current miners, collectors, and then analyzing this qualitatively and quantitatively many of these lexical resource corpuses. So you have between 1990 and 2020, 1990 being the date where we shut down the last Wani mine. And we also have the analysis of over 25 hours of videos that were shot. So the thesaurus and the results of the thesaurus, it's over 558 descriptors, 764 non-descriptors, so uncontrolled vocabulary, if you will. So this is made available in open source. We talked about that, the Heritage Cloud this morning. Here's some examples. You have the Tezomine, which is the thesaurus's name. You can see this up here. Selby and Cesai, and you can change, you can consult, but it's not for commercial use. So we have Manum, which is a French structure helping us, Humanum there, and that's the platform that hosts free of charge our thesaurus. Now, regarding onto-means, that's the ontology of mining heritage. We used CIDOC, as I mentioned, CIDOC, for reasons because it's an international standard for modeling knowledge, and the CRM. That's what's used in museums, and the CRM, that's the Open Data Conceptual Reference Model in the Ministry of Culture. So from the very beginning, the idea was to make this interoperable, make all of the data interoperable and available. And the method then was to start from the results of the thesaurus, identify classes and properties that in the model, and the CIDOC CRM seemed to be propitious for what we were trying to do, and then build up the ontology based on testimonials. So interviews and the results here, and then video shoots here as well. Now this is we saw this morning already. Ontology. This is FIDOC CRM. Sorry. This is the method, and this can be, and this works with our field initially. And it wasn't perfect, but we used it to round out these efforts. I'll pick up the pace here a little bit. Second outcome was the interface called Okapi, Open Knowledge-Based Annotation and Publishing Interface. Now this gives us an annotation of using the ontologies and those that we've developed, and which enables everyone to be able to annotate based on their needs. That can be related to various disciplines, history, sociology, linguistics. These could be segmented, and the videos then could be, and the searches could be categorized based on their needs and their purposes. So then we have the memory traces, mediation here, mediatization, sorry, at the Arenberg site. We have this open certain days during the year, so especially in the Open Heritage Days. And so we use some systems here. This is using video testimonials. This is a 3D mock-up where high school, college, university, high school, middle school students can get an understanding for mining, and then they can also have testimonials from former miners that can be associated with the various objects. And this is an abandoned mine site that you can see this here. And we also have this Augmented Book. And this can be viewed using a smartphone or a tablet. You can see here, you see a mining helmet that pops up, a mining hat, hard hat. And this is some former miners' pictures and testimonials. And here's virtual reality immersion. So you can go down into the mine shaft and walk around. And then based on the objects that are located here, you can have testimonials of former miners that come in and round out the visit. So this experiment consisted of modeling, 3D models. This was the mine shaft from Arenberg. And then here we used a drone here, and on the right, and you have the 3D execution of that. And with each time for us, we have the need to include comments from former miners. And then the last experience here is a holographic theater using Pepper's ghost technique, enabling one to view one of the miners who agreed to cooperate in this experience here in an interactive mode. So giving the viewers the opportunity to ask questions. And so it's semi-natural language with answers then to the questions put to them. I'm sorry, I had to move quickly. I'm sorry if I went too fast, but if you want any further information on the experiences that we've presented here, you can check the memomindshypothesis.org. You can get in touch there, and I thank you very much for listening.
So important to have the system when you have so many vast pile of material. Now I invite Émeric Gobert, who is a doctoral student in history and art history at the University of Tours and Centre d'études supérieures de la Renaissance. And I think that Émeric very often receives a question, is it heritage what you are researching? Because it's a graffiti, isn't it? So you are welcome, and please.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is my very great pleasure to be here. I'm very honored, but I'm sorry, I will speak in French. Nobody is perfect. Alors, je vous parlerai en effet des graffitis et...
So today I will be talking about graffiti and the transformation of graffiti into cultural heritage, something that's been occurring greatly over the past 10 years. So you may ask, why focus on this topic? Well, that's because over the past 20 and 30 years, cultural heritage has been broadening its scope to more and more items, and graffiti is one of those. Nathalie Eimisch wrote a book called Manufacturing Heritage from the Cathedral to a Teaspoon, and graffiti is part of that history. So if you're not building a pyramid or a cathedral, it means that you can still leave the trace of a graffiti on a wall in the hopes that it will go on to posterity. So more specifically, my work focuses on ancient graffiti dating from the second half of the 13th century up to the 19th century, up to Loches and the Loire. But I also observe other types of graffiti at other sites. And I'm also very much interested in modern graffiti by street artists or street paintings that are left behind. So now we're going to talk about how we can attribute heritage value to these older graffitis and some of the more recent ones. Let me start by giving you a definition of graffiti. And of course, definitions are not set in stone. They do evolve based on scientific movements. But graffiti is any type of writing or painting on a wall or on a surface that is not generally intended for such a message or such a trace. And so it can be on any type of medium, wood, metal, and so on and so forth. In Loches, in France, there's a wide variety of ancient graffiti. So, of course, nowadays, when people talk about graffiti, people think about the graffiti that's spray painted, maybe even vandalism. But in reality, it's much more complex than this. There are certain sites, such as Loches in Indre-et-Loire, in Cambrai, that certainly prove that graffiti has been around for a very long time. Now, so there are two types of graffiti: engraved graffiti, those are texts, and pictorial graffiti, amongst which are graffitis that were left behind by prisoners. And these are the types of graffiti that were best preserved in prisons or in castles that served as prisons over the years. Such was the case with Loches in France. So there's a lot of devotional graffiti as well, with religious scenes, with crosses, processions. You can also see priests praying. Then there are more warrior-like and military graffiti, paintings of armors or military scenes, combat scenes, or other types of scenes. For example, in Loches, on three sides of a same room, you have three actual-sized soldiers. So we're not talking about small graffiti necessarily. A lot of times, older graffiti will really take over the entire room in which the prisoner was kept or where a person lived. Graffiti also can be comprised of animals, buildings, boats, symbols, coats of arms. There are all sorts of types of graffiti that can be left behind. You also note that there's a lot of technical diversity in terms of how these older graffiti are drawn. Sometimes they can be engraved, they can be sculpted, or they can simply be printed onto something, leave an imprint rather. So there's a lot of different forms of ancient graffiti, whereas today's graffitis are mainly made with spray paint and with stencils, so perhaps a little bit less variety than in the past. And so there's scriptural graffiti with texts, poetic texts sometimes, or perhaps just noting one's passage in a jail cell. And all sorts of techniques are also used for these types of graffiti that are left behind. So the omnipresent appearance of these graffiti in the monuments around us, be it in castles or dungeons or churches, has brought about an increased interest on the part of scientists and specialists and also historians. And thanks to this, there is a graphitology science that examines graffiti in situ and also discusses this whole graffiti phenomenon. So when you ponder about graffiti, be it in terms of scientific studies, it also brings you to think about how it can be patrimonialized, that is to say, how can it be turned into cultural heritage? And that's because graffiti is a fragile heritage. It is exposed to many threats. It could be climate-based threats. There can be water infiltrations. It can also be due to a very large number of visitors who can sometimes cause vandalism. And it's important to act fast because we tend to forget that the stones of a castle are alive. They are living matter, and they will not remain as is forever. And that is why patrimonialization, making these into cultural heritage, is something extremely important. So why is it important to preserve this graffiti? Well, let me remind you that patrimonialization is the act of making a choice, of determining which objects, which locations should turn into or should become cultural heritage. And these are objects that society wishes to pass on to future generations. And this is not always an easy decision to make. So preserving this graffiti is important because this graffiti contains information. As such, they have a scientific and artistic value. What do they tell us? They are document, like a document is a source that tells us something, and these graffiti tell us something about the people who created them, how they wanted to represent things, what was their visual culture. And it also talks about the society from which these individuals came. And so it's very important to emphasize this above and beyond the fact that this is a fragile heritage. Another reason to preserve this ancient graffiti is because they reveal a gesture that exists today. People continue to produce graffiti today. Graffiti have been around from prehistoric times and times immemorial. And so it is rather a continuity which gives a lot of depth to the study of graffiti and to the making of cultural heritage out of this graffiti. So here I've provided on this slide a selection of modern-day graffiti. So you have monumental frescoes, wall paintings, and all this to say that graffitis are still produced today in the forms of murals or spray paint and other forms. So it's important to preserve graffiti and also to study the whole practice. And how do we do this? And this is where come into play the various digital tools that we now have at our avail. So what is our number one tool? Well, it's our eyes. And the use of digital tools comes afterwards. So, for example, if you want to emphasize the colors in a certain graffiti, this is what's done with Stretch. It's a plugin for imagery. You can use Photoshop also to augment contrast. So today we can use tools that will improve how these graffiti are deciphered. So we have to start with image processing. That is the first step. Digital tools are also important in terms of what we call cultural mediation. And so this is disseminating the graffiti so they can be viewed by the general public. At Loche, I worked with a group of computer specialists on an app within the fortress of Loche. So people can use this app to scan the walls of the fortress of Loche in order to find out information about what they're seeing. So it's an augmented reality, an AR app. Other projects are underway as well. And here I'd like to pay tribute to the project that is being conducted at the Castle of Celles in Cambrai, France. So here you have a virtual visit for a visitor who is fully immersed in front of these engraved panels, which today are quite damaged, and these are thus reproductions, which brings us to a third point. And here it's the experience of a museum visit on the part of visitors. This is something that has become increasingly important in today's societies. So in terms of graffiti, it can mean reproducing or replicating graffiti that's available in a castle through wood or through cardboard. And so they can be reproduced, which was done here, so that visitors can actually touch these reproductions rather than touching the original. Because we all want to, but we also have to remember that we all have this instinct to want to like leave a trace on the wall. So what's important is to preserve existing graffiti. And here we can have a digital approach. This is what the city of Florence did in 2016. They provided visitors with an app so that they could leave a digital trace of their passage in Florence. And this digital trace is preserved. And that's the bottom right-hand side of my slide. So this is digital use of a tool that enables us to preserve the original graffiti while enabling today's visitors to leave their own trace of their passage. I'd like to conclude by saying the following. First of all, the patrimonialization of graffiti, be they ancient or new, is very fleeting. And today's murals and graffiti have a more fleeting aspect than the ancient ones. Regardless of this, it brings to question the notion of memory and how to retain the memory of graffiti. We can take pictures of them, of course, but graffiti exists on the medium on which it is produced. So even if you take a picture of it, it's not going to be an in situ conservation of the graffiti. So graffiti is about scientific research, it's about conservation, and it's also about mediation, how to disseminate the object. And this is a step-by-step process. So quite often, science is on one side, you have patrimonialisation on the other side, and you forget to combine everything, which leaves out certain aspects. So all in all, what I like to underscore is the importance of graphitology. We need to study graffiti, and we need to come up with a protocol for analyzing and examining graffiti. We also need to determine how we can preserve graffiti on large monuments as well as on smaller monuments. There are many networks that can inventory these graffiti in France and in Europe. But this is a very ambitious project, but it has a very promising future. So let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aymeric. One more speaker, Marco Romagnoli, who will speak to us from Canada. Marco is a doctoral student in ethnology and heritage at Laval University, Quebec, and he is researching food on UNESCO's list, Challenges of a Heritage Aporia. Do we have a connection to Marco?
Hope so. Can you hear me and see me well?
Yes, when we look back, we can see you. Yes, please, okay. Marco. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, bonjour, and kwe, which is hello in your language. So from Quebec, thank you for the organization and the moderation of this topical symposium and for the prestigious locations where it takes place. I can feel, well, more, it perfumes culture from here, right, Cecilia? So heritage is not something existing per se, but a negotiated social agreement. And this agreement involves a selection. So it's an inclusion and exclusion rapport, but what we're talking about, and not everything can be heritagized. In recent decades, we have not only witnessed to the officialization of a new heritage category at UNESCO, which is intangible heritage, but also to other cultural elements, which is food, gastronomy, and national cuisines on the representative list of intangible heritage of UNESCO. So the former chief of the intangible heritage section at UNESCO once said, "We're not going to become the map of world gastronomy. That is not the purpose of the Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Heritage." However, since 2010, the race that countries run to candidate their culinary practices has not stopped yet. And as of 2022, gastronomy registrations range from Japanese washoku to North Korean kimchi, Armenian lavash, and even Arabic and Turkish coffee. So the objective of my oral presentation, for which I have no PowerPoint, it's just, you can just see my face and hear my voice, is to provide an analytical framework concerning the heritage activation of certain elements related to food. So I'll start by exposing the process of patrimonialization of food at UNESCO. Then I'll continue with the impacts on the field. The heritagization of the Mediterranean diet. These are actually the preliminary results of my PhD thesis. And I'll conclude with the major issues and some avenues to solve this challenge, actually, that is posed by the cultural officialization of food at UNESCO. So according to one of the founding fathers of the 2003 convention, Sherif Kaznadar, intangible heritage would have not been meant to have been about food, diet, or cuisines. And this is easily extrapolated by the absence of a food domain among the 5 main domains exemplifying the definition of ICH, for example, craftsmanship or social practices. On the other hand, during an emblematic meeting in Vitré, in France in 2009, experts stressed the need to give a central role to social and cultural processes associated with consumption patterns, but without referring to the products themselves. So at the base of the reasoning was the fact that an integration of consumption patterns would have allowed a representation of food practices as a ritual, a cultural, social expressions, and then answering actually to the areas of intervention of the convention in a coherent way. So now food has become worthy of heritage, we can say so, but this paradigmatic shift has not been exempt from several concerns that should be mentioned, because the first food files, such as the Mexican cuisine, the repas gastronomique des Français, the Mediterranean diet, showed characteristics more focused on market development and international prestige. And even from the perspective of UNESCO, the first elements inscribed, there was a kind of reluctance to patrimonialize them, basically due to the high probability of misinterpretation of food heritage, the spatial, temporal, and even the conceptual breadth of the food heritage category, and also the possible race that nations could undergo to register their gastronomy, their national cuisines, actually, in a sort of, as I call, domino effect. So if we move to the second point of the presentation, which is the patrimonialization of the Mediterranean diet at UNESCO, we could say that this corresponds to the end point of completion of the romanticization of the Mediterranean space. So by representing an existing physical space, which is the Mediterranean, and the use of its human data, we can say in their way of eating, we're talking more about a memory, but a memory lived nostalgically in the present. So this establishes like an ideal typical space of the Mediterranean and for the Mediterranean people, and the patrimonialization of this diet, which comes from the ancient Greek term dieta, meaning lifestyle, way of style, was made possible first through a double capture. So the first is that of nutrition, so it's the Chiesian medicine, and second, by the rich anthropological foundations provided by scientific studies on Mediterranean food cultures. But the fact of inscribing these cultural elements seems to refer to the fact that it is either dead. So, as I said before, it's more a memory than something lived and living, or this element is in the process of socially disappearing to become nothing more than an imaginary referent. And so it seems, again, that the patrimonialization of this way of life, of this dieta, reveals a kind of commemorative epigraph about it. That is to say that the process of heritagization could be potentially deadly for the practice. And then we can talk about the heritage embalming. It's a kind of a hindrance making the evolution of this heritage possible. So there are major issues, but there are also possible avenues, of course. Otherwise, we wouldn't do research, right? So the first one is a bit drastic, maybe, but it's stop proposing and officializing, so labeling food culture at UNESCO, since it could lead to an aporia. An aporia basically is a puzzlement, is a problem whose possibilities of solution are cancelled from the start by its contradiction. So heritagizing food would be an aporia in this sense. If we push the argument, Kirschenblatt-Gimblet argues that the expression living heritage is a contradiction in terms, because if it's really alive, it does not need to be safeguarded. But if it's almost dead, the safeguard will have no effect. So the topic sometimes may lead to real aporias. As a second point, which is less drastic, less, let's say, radical, if food patrimonialization does not stop, which is the highest probability for the near future at least, the safeguarding measures in the management of this heritage can be enhanced. So this issue lies in the constriction of the measures dedicated to its protection, because the only instrument for evaluating the safeguarding plans proposed by the member states and for updating the status of the elements in the list is limited to periodic reports, so les rapports périodiques, to be submitted to the Intergovernmental Committee by member states. But it's a question of evaluating also this safeguarding, because is the safeguarding of food possible? Are the periodic reports sufficient or not, or at the limit of administrative paperwork, if there are not even studies on the field exposing the perception and the representations of the heritage bearers, of the heritage community? And last point is that maybe more field works and evaluations on the field are required, because the periodic reports don't make up for the almost total absence of field studies, comparative or not, verifying in situ the impacts, the effects of heritagization. And for example, the documentation of activities organized within the Mediterranean communities of the Mediterranean diet. It seems it's like something at the beginning that it's more a task given to member states by the School of the Material than an effective safeguard measure. So to conclude, thinking about food greatly helps us to reveal how we understand our personal and collective identities, as well as the interesting but also problematic understanding of our relationship to others. And as Claude Fischler once said about the multiple meanings of food, man is an omnivore who feeds on meat, plants, and imagination. So food refers to biology, of course, but it cannot be reduced to it. There's also the symbolic, the myths, the science. And we are at a time of important challenges, because what is clear is that intangible heritage and within its scope, food heritage is at a key moment, both of recognition, of social awareness, and for its need of safeguard. We've seen that from also previous presentations. And food applications that are currently inscribed on the list, and those will continue to be declared intangible heritage, will continue to abound. And the need, there's something even more urgent to me, that is the need of a more specific heritage glossary, a specific and identifying terminology for food heritage, even a category dedicated to it. And that challenge, understood from a perspective as open as it's committed, is found at the very basis of the protection of food systems as a cultural heritage, and not only. So I'll finish here. Thank you very much for your attention. Merci beaucoup. Inunu,
Thank you very much. Inunu and Inuit language. Et j'ai
and discussion, probably not discussion anymore, but what I want to summarize after all these 4 fascinating topic research and presentations, I think, be it material or immaterial, tangible or intangible, the very important thing, what Émeric has already pointed out, that the medium, it is a medium which is reproduced, and how it will be preserved for the future generations in the long term. All those recordings or samples or recipes, but it will be not the original authentic thing, but it's a reproduction. But we have the audience, also the remote audience, and I would like to ask Alexander, do we have questions from the remote audience? One question we can pick up.
So yes. Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Okay. I received one question to Marco Romagnoli. In your view, should UNESCO, in line with the Agenda 2030, promote the most sustainable food rather than existing food tradition and national cuisines? For example, should UNESCO promote vegetarian food?
That's an interesting question. So if according to the agenda, more sustainable food instead of traditional should be safeguarded, is it the question?
The question isn't quite clear, is it? Do I understand? Okay.
Sorry, I couldn't hear Marco.
Can you actually repeat the question, please?
Yes, the question is, in your view, should UNESCO, in line with the Agenda 2030, promote sustainable food rather than existing food traditions and national cuisines?
Okay. Well, it depends on the objective of patrimonialization, because as the other presenter said, we preserve something that is of value, but the fact of the traditional foods, they're not in contrast with sustainable ways. Actually, for the Mediterranean diet, which is my research topic, even the very definition of it comes from dieta, which means a way of life. So it means that it should actually, according to its construction, it's based on, for example, the seasonality of the products. That is, of course, a matter of sustainability. So it consumes local products, which are in the perimeter of the place where they are produced. So in a way, I'm not sure if patrimonializing something means that that is sustainable, and I don't. It's a very large topic actually to talk about, but usually, for example, for the Mediterranean diet, in this case, it is a sustainable way of life. But the conundrum, the dilemma, is that it's more a memory. It's usually it's promoted something that existed in the 1950s and 60s, where there was hunger, there were food deprivations after the wars. So we should be careful to consider something in a more contemporary way and contextualize to it. I don't know if I answered your question, because it's quite large to talk about it, but I don't think that traditions are in contrast with sustainability. And I think also that the concept of sustainability should be revised a bit, because we talk about something that was proposed firstly 40 years ago, but I don't see maybe in the political and economic agenda a way to be more sustainable urgently, despite the words. So I think that, as once Severin Suzuki said in 1992 at the Congress in Rio, she said that we should do our actions should reflect our words. That is my conclusion to the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We terribly are out of time, and I think that the live audience will have the opportunity to talk with the speakers during the breaks and in the social event. So I would like to thank you all. It's a fascinating research topic. Carry on, and we will carry on the discussions. Thank you.